Hello and welcome to the 13th episode of the European Conservatives podcast, Brussels and Beyond, a podcast designed to keep you in the loop about the political wheelings and dealings that are happening in Brussels and in the capitals of Europe. My name is Zoltán Kottas. Slovakia's Prime Minister, Robert Fico, was in a very serious but stable condition on Thursday, following an assassination attempt against him the day before. The Prime Minister underwent 5 hours of surgery with 2 teams to treat multiple gunshot wounds. The 59-year-old politician was shot in the central Slovakian town of Handlova. After a government meeting, Fico went to shake hands with a crowd of people who had gathered outside the venue and was shot 5 times at point-blank range by 71-year-old Juraj Cintula, a poet and writer and former security guard at a shopping mall who had taken part in previous anti-Fico demonstrations. The Prime Minister was immediately rushed to his car by his security detail and taken to the nearest hospital by helicopter. The perpetrator was wrestled to the ground. He was charged on Thursday with attempted premeditated murder and will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. The Slovakian Minister of the Interior, Matúš Šutaj-Eštok, stated that the assassination was politically motivated. Juraj Cintula had no previous brushes with the law, but had been vocal about his disdain toward the current government. Since coming back into power following parliamentary elections in September, Fico has been criticized by both his Slovakian and European political opponents for his nationalist, anti-globalist, sovereigntist stance, as well as his tough EU-critical anti-immigration and anti-war rhetoric. He has been accused of being pro-Russian for refusing to send weapons to Ukraine and condemning EU sanctions against Russia that he believes harm Europe economically. The political debate in Slovakia has been heated in the previous months, with the opposition accusing Fico of rule of law violations and organizing regular protests against the government. Fico had previously warned about a possible assassination attempt when, on April 10th, he said there was a lot of tension in society, which he attributed to the opposition Liberal Party Progressive Slovakia, the press, and the hysteria surrounding the parliamentary election results. After nearly 6 months of negotiations, 4 Dutch right-wing parties have come to an agreement on forming a government coalition. Last November's parliamentary elections were won by Geert Wilders and his Party for Freedom, clinching an impressive 37 of the 150 seats in parliament and doubling its presence. According to Wilders, asylum policy in particular will be a top priority for the new government, which will adopt one of the strictest asylum policies ever. He said that immigration is a drain on housing, care, education, financial resources and social cohesion, therefore limiting the scale of and getting a grip on all types of migration to the Netherlands as soon as possible is necessary for now and for the longer term. Dilan Yeşilgöz, leader of the centre-right VVD party, which is also said to become part of the coalition, said security in the Netherlands and abroad would be a top priority, stressing that the new cabinet would continue supporting Ukraine and that sensible climate measures would be passed. The EU's controversial Migration Pact, designed to harmonise asylum policy across member states, got its final stamp of approval in Brussels on Tuesday. The Pact's solidarity mechanism, requiring member states to accept a quota of refugees or pay a €20,000 fine per each refused migrant, has been fiercely resisted by right-wing parties across Europe. The pact was first approved by the European Parliament in April, with many Conservative MEPs making accusations that it would merely enshrine open border policies and even punish member states for non-compliance. On Tuesday, member states also gave their blessing to the deal with a qualified majority. As expected, Hungary and Poland objected the pact, with abstentions by Ireland, the Czech Republic and Denmark. The passing of the Migration Pact is directly tied to attempts by Brussels and mainstream parties to subdue a rise of right-wing populism expected to be seen in next month's European elections. Liberal MEPs expressed fears that this legislative term was their last opportunity for progressives to dictate the terms of the EU's migration policy before populists gained more power. MCC Brussels, one of the co-organisers of the recent National Conservative Conference, NatCon, will issue a lawsuit against local district mayor Emir Kir for attempting to shut down the conference to silence political opposition. Organised last month in Brussels, NatCon was attended by well-known conservative political and academic figures, including Prime Minister of Hungary Viktor Orbán, former Prime Minister of Poland Mateusz Morawiecki, former UKIP and Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage, and former British Home Secretary Suella Braverman. The conference was under attack from Brussels authorities from the beginning, as two venues were pressured into cancelling the event at the very last minute. When a third venue accepted to host it just hours before the start, Mayor Emir Kir opted to send police officers to the venue to physically shut down the conference, while admitting that he was doing it to strip the, quote, far right of its platform. Only due to the quick intervention of ADF International, an NGO defending free speech that legally challenged the mayor's intervention, could the conference resume. In order to prevent similar attacks from taking place, MCC Brussels launched the Brussels Free Speech Declaration. The goal is to cultivate a network in support of all those whose democratic rights are threatened by censorship, vague invocations of safety concerns, threats and smear attacks from whatever political backgrounds. For the first time in over a decade, separatist parties in the Spanish region of Catalonia will not have a majority to form a government following elections last Sunday. The separatist Junts party of Carles Puigdemont, who as Catalan president in 2017 led an illegal referendum and attempted to declare the region's independence from Spain, came second, gaining 35 seats in the 135-seat parliament. Another separatist party, left-wing ERC, came in third with only 20 seats. The clear winner of the elections was the Socialist Party with 42 seats, but it is still not clear whether regional party leader Salvador Illa can form a government of his own. The Socialists will have to keep in mind that they depend on the support of Catalan separatists to maintain their weak national government in Madrid. Spain's Socialist Prime Minister, Pedro Sánchez, is pushing through an amnesty for the leaders of the last Catalonian independence referendum in order to gain the support of separatists in the national parliament, which he needs to stay in power. The question now remains whether the Socialists would align with the separatist party in Catalonia. In an interview for the European Conservative, Alberto Taradas, the youngest member of the Catalan parliament and a member of the right-wing Vox party, which has 11 seats in the new Catalan parliament, says Vox's appeal comes from the fact that Islamism is spreading across Catalonia. As an example, he spoke of a Muslim-run bar in the city of Figueras, where women were forbidden to enter. It is a symptom of what is happening, especially considering that in Catalonia there are more than 300 mosques, and in a third of them, Salafism is being preached, the most radical version of Islam. Nobody wants to talk about this. Islamism is being whitewashed, he says. He emphasized that the governing Catalan separatists are responsible, who in the last 10 years have favored an open borders policy. They have managed to change the social reality, and there has been an increase in crime levels, making them higher than in the rest of Spain, thanks to a massive influx of foreigners. He goes on to say that the separatists who are so concerned about defending what is Catalan are not concerned that there are streets where there is not a single sign in Catalan, not a single Spanish shop, or where none of our languages are spoken. It is not only a question of insecurity, it is also a loss of identity. Alberto Taradas believes Vox is attracting a lot of former socialist voters from working class neighborhoods that are suffering from squatting and crime, and which in some cases have a foreign population of more than 50%. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is running into unexpected problems in her quest for a second 5-year stint as the EU's top official. Conservative members of the European Parliament are demanding her departure in exchange for cooperation with the centrist European People's Party. My colleague Thomas O'Reilly has been covering the story. Thomas, what seems to be hampering Ursula von der Leyen's bid in getting re-elected as Commission President?
The key issue that von der Leyen is facing is that the race to become EU Commission President is less of a democratic vote and more of a technocratic coronation, with court politics happening behind the scenes away from European voters. Despite the fact that the position has been in effect since 1958, the office of the Commission Presidency has grown in power the last 10 years under the terms of the Lisbon Treaty. In particular, von der Leyen is facing internal problems, such as what counts as campaigning and what counts as her regular duties as Commission President. You see this over disputes over which social media accounts she can use. There is a certain freezing in sort of relations even within her own EPP parliamentary party. We saw this week that even members of Forza Italia were very skeptical about being seen in public with von der Leyen. There's also issues behind the scenes at a member state level. Von der Leyen, because of her Ukraine policy, because of her perceived sympathy towards NATO, is seen as the Anglo-American candidate within Brussels circles, with sort of rumoured covert attempts by Emmanuel Macron to replace her by a more pro-European, less Anglophile candidate like Mario Draghi. But a very strange campaign trail going on for arguably the most important role in European politics at the moment.
5 years ago, when Ursula von der Leyen was elected, the European Parliament, a thin majority of the European Parliament voted her in, and among those parties were the European People's Party and even some members of the European Conservatives and Reformists group. Why is she now so unpopular with conservatives?
Well, traditionally, von der Leyen and her EPP centrist group rely on an alliance system between Greens, Federalists, and Socialists, and that kind of gives European institutions this kind of left liberal ideological hegemony that it's synonymous with the last 10 years. But as to von der Leyen's unpopularity, it ranges from disquiet over her pro-Ukraine policy, particularly on the right. Obviously, her spearheading of an aggressive green agenda in 2019, buoyed on by the green protests of the time, as well as sort of factional fighting within the EPP centrist group. It is generally acknowledged there is a north-south divide within the EPP, the party that consists of most Christian democratic parties. There is an anti-von der Leyen faction led by German Christian Democrat Manfred Weber, and they take issue with the extent to which the agenda has been given over to green NGOs. Aside from the right, there are criticisms on the left over her handling of the Palestine and Israel conflict, with the perception that she rushed to nail down the foreign policy line for the EU as being pro-Israel before the matter had been clarified. But definitely green issues, migration, most recently the Migration Pact, as well as foreign policy, are the three hot button topics as to general disquiet on the European right regarding von der Leyen and her tenure.
As I mentioned, the European Parliament will have to vote to agree on the next European Commission President, but in the end, it is the heads of the European governments who have to decide who the Commission chief is. Could they opt for someone other than von der Leyen after the European elections?
It's very much possible. You've seen names thrown around as I mentioned, Mario Draghi, Italy's rather famous technocratic prime minister of the Eurozone crisis. He's believed to have the backing of President Macron and other sort of governments as well, who are skeptical of von der Leyen's pro-Atlantic stance. But yes, the role of the Commission President, it is a rather awkward one, despite the power that resides in the office. It is elected through a combination of member states who initially propose and agree on a candidate, and then it requires a sort of a majority vote in the European Parliament. The real question, it's not just if von der Leyen returns, is whether you see the emergence of centre to centre-right to populist right axis of power that can counteract the traditional liberal left hegemony in the European Parliament that could elect either von der Leyen or an alternative to von der Leyen come after June, July, September, when the vote is expected to be held.
Thomas, thank you very much. A court in Germany ruled on Monday that the anti-globalist, anti-immigration AfD party can be designated as a suspected extremist organization. This means that the domestic intelligence agency has the right to spy on the party using such intelligence tools as phone tapping, intercepting emails, or recruiting informants from inside the party. The intelligence agency initially labeled the AfD as a suspected right-wing extremist group 3 years ago. The AfD challenged this designation first in a lower court and then the upper court, but both rejected AfD's appeal. The most recent verdict says there is sufficient evidence that the AfD pursues goals that run against the human dignity of certain groups and against democracy. AfD says the intelligence services were being abused politically to go after the government's political opponents. The court ruling was no surprise, given that the political elite in Germany has for years been attempting to undermine the party, whose popularity has been steadily rising. The AfD is currently the second highest polling party in Germany, with around 18 to 19% support, and will likely become the largest force in 3 eastern states, Brandenburg, Saxony and Thuringia, which are holding state elections this autumn. The next step could be to classify the AfD as proven right-wing extremist, a label already officially used for the youth wing of the party, Junge Alternative, as well as 3 regional branches of the party. This classification would allow for even more increased surveillance of the group and its members' activities. However, politicians of mainstream parties have made it very clear that their main aim is to ban the party outright. Germany's largest opposition and most popular party, the centre-right CDU-CSU alliance, has promised to reintroduce mandatory military service if it retakes power in Berlin. The alliance believes this is a necessary step because of the threat from Russia and the lack of personnel in the army. Until 2011, 18-year-olds were able to choose between spending 1 year in the military or in the social sector, but this program was axed. Minister of Defense Boris Pistorius of the largest governing party, the Social Democrats, is reportedly considering a system based on the Swedish model that's a lot softer than what CDU has in mind. The Swedish draft law, reintroduced in 2017, only makes a medical examination compulsory for 18-year-olds of both genders, but keeps the actual conscription voluntary. Similar partial conscription models are in place in Denmark, Norway and the Baltic countries, while Austria, Switzerland, Finland and Greece have active general conscription, though all of them offer some forms of alternative social service. In a recent interview, CSU politician Manfred Weber, who is the leader of the European People's Party, said he was a strong supporter of general military service for the whole of Europe, but the choice for social sector alternatives must also be offered to young people. Concerns over minority rights in Transcarpathia explain, at least in part, why Hungary is not following in the footsteps of other EU countries when it comes to Ukraine. Hungary has had a hostile relationship with Ukraine for many years, but the relationship has become even more tense since the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine 2 years ago. Though Hungary has welcomed hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian refugees and provided humanitarian assistance for the war-torn country, it has refused to send military aid and is against granting Ukraine EU or NATO membership. In his in-depth analysis for the European Conservative, Luke Larson, a visiting fellow at the Matthias Corvinus Collegium in Budapest, examines the reasons for the hostility. Viktor Orbán's conservative Hungarian government is accusing Ukraine of threatening the survival of its Hungarian ethnic community who live in Transcarpathia, Ukraine's westernmost region. Ukraine's laws in previous years have aimed at limiting the use of any language other than Ukrainian in schools and public spaces. Many Hungarians in the region see education as a vital means of saving their culture. If you get rid of Hungarian from your schools, if you get rid of Hungarian from the streets and cultural events, and you make Hungarian a language that is solely spoken in the household, then it's going to kill a national identity in the short term, says Balázs Tárnok, a minority rights specialist at the University of Public Service in Budapest. The Hungarian minority is also increasingly threatened over its use of Hungarian flags and the singing of the Hungarian national anthem. The Hungarian government has provided funding to the large Hungarian communities of Transylvania in Romania, Vojvodina in Serbia, Transcarpathia in Ukraine, and others. Budapest frames its actions regarding the Ukraine war in light of the safety of Hungarians, those in both Ukraine and Hungary. This helps explain the nation's refusal to allow weapons shipments to pass through its border with Ukraine, reasoning that the move would open Transcarpathia to attacks from Russia. Hungary presents its opposition to supporting the war effort as an attempt to stand on the side of peace to avoid unnecessarily escalating a conflict on its doorstep, writes Luke Larson. Anti-white racism is the dominant and most important form of racism in America today. Jeremy Carl tells Rod Dreher in an interview for the European Conservative, which you can read on our website. Jeremy Carl is the author of a new book called The Unprotected Class: How Anti-White Racism is Tearing America Apart. In this, he explains why the narrative on race is wrong, but also why demonizing the white majority is a foolish, even dangerous idea in a multicultural society. In the interview, he says anti-white racism is the most important kind of racism in American life today because white people are the most prevalent group in America. They're the founding, historically dominant population, a group that is deeply intertwined with America's history and culture. But what society is doing is increasingly taking this group and attempting to marginalize it. Jeremy Carl talks, for instance, about informal racism in Hollywood, with white people being portrayed negatively, something that isn't done with any other race in the same way. He adds, and I quote, "If we don't get back to a more historic American ideal, where we're trying to treat everybody equally based on the content of their character, not their race, we are going to empower extremists on all sides." Jeremy Carl also gave his views on the upcoming European elections, whose outcome will be partly determined by the migration crisis. He said, and I quote, "If European leaders don't get more serious about understanding the ways that we've gone wrong in the way we think about race and society, then dangers to Europe are even more profound than those we find in America." And that concludes this episode of Brussels and Beyond. Don't forget to read our magazine, check out our website, subscribe to our Twitter, Facebook and YouTube channels, and watch our monthly TV show, Inside Brussels. Hope you tune in again next week. Have a very good week. Bye-bye.